Electronic Arts. They have been among the biggest and most impactful producers of video games for many years. Along with the rest of the industry, their revenues have been rising, and they currently generate over $5 billion annually, and the reason for that is that they have been producing some of the most well-liked and successful video games in the world during that time. Among countless others, they're the company behind The Sims, Need for Speed, Madden, and FIFA, which is now called EA Sports FC. However, I doubt that many of you will be shocked to learn that EA has not had the best reputation throughout the years. In fact, they've been commonly referred to as the Evil Empire, and that may not even be the worst of it. What about this? Every year, the well-known website The Consumerist hosts this competition, asking users to select the worst American company. You can probably guess where this is going, but in 2012, 250,000 people cast their vote for EA, making them the winner. They beat out some tough competition, which included airlines, retail stores, and banks. When a manufacturer of entertaining video games won the title and went on to win twice for the worst company in America, a lot of people were surprised. The next year, they again won that same competition. 6 years later, they were listed among the top 20 most hated companies in America by USA Today, which is more proof of the hatred. So today, I want to identify some of the major reasons behind that resentment. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything, just to be clear. I don't personally have anything against them, but I do recognize that they are disliked by many people, and I would want to talk about why. In what I would say were the early days of home video gaming, Trip Hawkins started Electronic Arts, and I have to say that even before EA existed, this was a person with an impressive resume. After earning an MBA from Stanford and a Harvard degree, he was part of Apple's first 50 employees in the late 1970s. He left Apple after 4 years with the intention of launching his own home-based business where he would create and market video games for personal computers. The original name of the business was Amazing Software with an apostrophe, but it was quickly changed to Electronic Arts. He firmly believed that every video game was a unique piece of art, which is why he changed the name to EA. The developers were the artists, and the name should reflect that. I would have to agree with that and say that this sounds like the perfect mentality to start a business like this. He raised $5 million from private investors in less than a year, used it to hire over a dozen staff members, moved the business out of his house, and even released some of their first video games. Earlier on, the ideas were famously from independent creators from outside the company, and their names were featured on the cover of the games. I am not the first one to point out that they resembled musical album covers, and I must admit that this 1/4 pinball construction set is one of the coolest covers ever. Another notable game around this time was Larry Bird Go 1-on-1. In fact, this can be considered as the early roots of EA Sports, and it established the practice of using sports personalities in the production and marketing of their games, most famously seen in the John Madden series. 5 years later, they started sending their own games directly to the stores. Additionally, Electronic Arts was the top manufacturer of computer game software at the end of the 1980s. However, by this time, it was beginning to appear that consoles were emerging as the more viable market, and as a matter of fact, there were far more owners of TVs than computers in the US. NES, the most popular system on the market, was taking advantage of that fact. The issue for them was that Nintendo said EA can only make games for the NES if they weren't made available on any other system. He then took a significant chance by ignoring those terms and directing their attention to the recently released Sega Genesis instead. In 1989, EA raised $84 million through an initial public stock offering, and a significant portion of the money was put toward producing games for the Genesis. The collaboration between Sega and EA helped both companies advance through the early 1990s, and it was evident how this affected their sales growth. In 1992, they sold more console games than PC games, and the following year, Sega games accounted for more than half of their $300 million in revenue, and that's how Electronic Arts became a force in the video game industry. And up until this point, as far as I know anyway, they were pretty liked. But I'm going to go ahead and say that this is when they started to run into trouble, which brings me to the first reason behind the hatred. Believe it or not, EA has a long history of purchasing smaller, usually independent video game production firms, and to say it as it is, destroying them. You see, EA wanted to capitalize on the growing popularity of their Sega games in 1992 in order to expand their business. They were seeking to increase both their gaming development and their global reach. In 1992, they made their second significant acquisition when they purchased Origin Systems. They have been making video games since the 1980s, and their most well-known work was their Ultimate series. It was considered to be a groundbreaking early RPG for the computer. The development of the renowned Ultima series was taken over by EA after they acquired Origin Systems. 2 years later, when making Ultima 8, it is widely believed that the production of it was rushed because EA set an unrealistic deadline, and as a result the game felt incomplete and had numerous plot holes. The same thing happened with Ultima 9. Their sales and reputation declined as a result of their inferior quality. EA canceled the series and shut off Origin Systems completely in 2004 due to declining sales. Now I know it's not all this simple and direct, but from the public's perception, EA took control of a perfectly good developer, forced them to put out some bad games, and then shut them down because of it. The events involving Bullfrog serve as another example. This was a UK-based video game developer, again, going back to the 1980s, that was most known for their strategy games like Populous. In 1995, they were also bought by EA. Under their management, they even released the popular game Dungeon Keeper, but by 2001, Bullfrog no longer existed because they were merged into EA UK. Again, their stories of Russian games and Bullfrog's culture shock might have been the main problem in this case. EA turned the whole thing into more of a professional operation, and the new environment may have hindered their creativity. In any event, it is still true that EA bought a successful and promising game developer, then practically shut them down 6 years later. A third major example is Westwood Studios, yet another game developer going back to the 1980s that was best known for their Command & Conquer series. In 1998, EA purchased them as part of a wider $122 million deal, and 5 years later, they shut down when EA consolidated some of their studios. We could see the trend here, but there are many more instances. Do you know the Book of Mice and Men? Lenny loved the rabbits, but he would kill them by giving them too much attention and hugs. I believe that's what was going on here. EA wanted those developers to perform so well that they would attempt to modify them to fit their own tested system, which included imposing aggressive deadlines and establishing a more formal and rigorous corporate culture. However, their efforts to improve the situation ultimately backfired. They hindered innovation and caused stress for everyone. I also want to emphasize how different this is from how they began it. They are called Electronic Arts, yet they really seem to undermine the artistic aspect of it. Trust me, the whole video could be about this, but I need to move on to the second reason because it's probably the most relevant one today. I think you can see where I'm going with this. It involves loot boxes and microtransactions. It basically refers to situations in which you must use actual money to unlock items in a game, and EA has been infamous for including these all over the place. These, we must admit, are a good way for EA to maintain a revenue stream long after the game has been sold, but it doesn't go over well with the players.
Oh man, I have to pay a microtransaction to unlock? That's So
I'm sure many of you know about these all too well. I'll go straight to the big one. I am referring to Star Wars Battlefront 2, which was met with unprecedented criticism from the gaming community in 2017 before it was even formally released. This was because the game's loot box system was designed to give the player gameplay and signal advantages, essentially making it pay to win, and nobody wants that. The game would cost $60 up front, and you would be at a disadvantage to other players if you didn't want to pay more, and on top of that, major desirable characters such as Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader had to be unlocked by either playing the game for something like 40 hours or by buying these loot boxes. The whole thing felt very shady. It appeared like EA was more focused on collecting money from the players than providing a fun experience. In fact, they say that all of this was done to give players a sense of accomplishment and to help them complete missions that unlock heroes, but that didn't go over well either. Even Disney, the company that owns Star Wars, criticized the idea that the loot boxes required to play the game properly encouraged gambling among players, and the entire backlash was turning into bad press for the franchise, and it appears that this particular incident might have been the last straw that forced EA to address some of the game's problems. My final reason behind this hatred is admittedly smaller than the last two, but I think it's worth mentioning, and that is exploiting employees. And when I say this, I mostly mean the class action lawsuits pertaining to overtime pay that were resolved in 2006. It all began in 2004 when someone wrote on a blog that their husband was working 13 hours a day, 7 days a week at EA. I mean, that's more than 90 hours a week. The post received a lot of attention, and it led to 2 separate class action lawsuits filed by the artist and the programmers that were both settled for around $15 million in 2006. In addition, they also changed it so that 200 of their employees would be eligible for overtime pay. So there we have it, 3 separate reasons behind the hatred that aren't entirely different from each other. I would sum up everything by stating that a large portion of the gaming community's customers believe that EA is primarily focused on making money. It seems like they see their customers as nothing more than a walking bag of money, and their employees are nothing more than just a way to get that money from them. Again, I'm not weighing in either way whether this is the case or not, because I don't know, but things like these do create that perception. Tell me in the comments below, what are your thoughts about EA? Do you think of them more as a fantastic game designer or as an evil empire? And if you do happen to be on that evil empire side of things, do your reasons line up with the ones that I talked about? Remember, this is not an exhaustive list. You may dislike them for completely different reasons. I just perceive these to be the most common or the most significant. So any thoughts you have about Electronic Arts, put them in the comments section. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
EA Sports, it's in the game.
Thank you for watching and your support.